Hey, thanks for joining me today. We are going to paint a little seascape today, and we're going to base this based upon a photograph that we had taken on our last trip down the shore, actually about a year ago, and that's the Jersey Shore. I'm going to start with a little wash of yellow ochre, and I'm going to take this across the entire canvas and then eventually subtract from it using a paper towel to bring out some of the values that I want to see in the painting. It's a very thin wash of yellow ochre that also includes a little teeny tiny bit of sap green and a whole lot of linseed oil. I'm just going to cover the whole canvas with my little flat brush that I'm using on this small stretch canvas. Now that we have it all covered, I'm going to go ahead and start thinking about the different values, the lights and the darks within the painting based upon this composition, which you'll see get mapped out rather quickly here. Rolled up a piece of paper towel or shop cloth to a very dull point. I'm just going to use that point to wipe away some of the yellow ochre. Just established what looks like the horizon line. And now the lightest part of the painting, which is the sun peeking through the morning haze just above the horizon in this image. And some of the reflected light off of the clouds that it's peeking through. That's the lightest point in this painting, and that is what I will actually key the painting off of. Everything in this painting should be some degree darker than the sun. Seems obvious, but it's helpful when trying to create the illusion of luminosity and the brightness of the sun, which is not an easy thing to do. To take extra care to ensure that you're keying off of it to make sure the values through the rest of the painting are at least as close to what reality would display as possible. Now I'm creating some of the striations that will naturally happen from the waves cascading up on shore. Just little hints, little keys that'll help me pull this painting together. Basically, all of the horizontal planes, the top of the water, the surface of the water, will tend to be a little bit lighter than some of the surfaces that are a little more vertical or at varying angles, varying degrees of angles. Those will tend to have a shadow cast across those surfaces. And those lighter spots on the painting are intended to represent those horizontal surfaces, the top of the water, very top of the water. I'm going to go in and take a little mixture of sap green and burnt sienna and painter's gray, and I'm going to darken, or Payne's gray I should say, I'm going to darken some of those shadows and bring them down in tonal quality a little bit further. Now these are going to be the front end of the waves that are coming in. These planes are at a much steeper angle, in some cases fully vertical, and therefore they're casting a shadow upon themselves. So they're going to be the darkest parts of this painting. And we'll just sketch in some notes, some hints of where those darker vertical planes are actually going to exist in the composition here of the painting. And then we'll also create a little mixture of that same dark color with a little hint of ultramarine blue and titanium white, just to ensure that we create the foundation for some of the darker ripples that will appear on those horizontal surfaces as well. The Jersey Shore, for those that grew up in the New York metro area, the Philadelphia area and surrounding areas, is an important destination in the summer, and for many people. I grew up going to the shore every summer. And then some unique traditions popped up from that. From time to time, different periods of time, we would have pretty sizable, family gatherings in LBI for a period of about a decade and a half, I would say. And they would usually happen late in the season, in the fall, just as the off-season was about to start, when the beaches were less crowded and the water was still warm. And there were a myriad of times where there would be, day trips or long weekend trips that were spent down the shore with my immediate family. So I spent a lot of time looking at the water. There were some times when I went down with grandparents. There were times where I went down exclusively just on fishing trips. And I think that's where my fascination with the water really started, and my ability to actually see the water and observe the water, and my interest in catching some of the illusions associated with drawing and painting the water actually emanate from. I guess the same thing could be said about the sky, which I've started here, just laying in some of the foundational darker elements of the sky. In this scene, there's a little bit of a haze, like there happens to be on many mornings over the water, as you get that interplay between the water surface and the air. Sometimes when the air is cooler than the water temperature on the surface of the water, you'll see a nice haze toward the horizon. And as the sun peeks through over the horizon, it creates this little dance of different colors. But what I'm doing now is just laying in some of the foundational darker colors. And this happens to be a mixture of a little bit of cadmium red and ultramarine blue mixed with white, and then a little bit of Payne's gray. You'll notice this. I'm starting out this painting in a way where it's heavily flexed toward gray and heavily flexed toward yellow ochre. And a little bit of an experiment here, but I find particularly with water, it's helpful to start with that, in most cases, start with that sort of approach. A lot of the reflections in water of all types are going to be very hard to define by way of a common shape. And in addition to that, many of the colors that are reflected off of the water tend to be less saturated. And one of the ways, less saturated than the actual objects that they are reflecting. So if you have a intensely blue sky, the reflection off of the water might not be quite as blue. It might be a little muted, and definitely less saturated, less pigment. Oftentimes saturated by way of a slight gray tint. Maybe it's grayish green or grayish blue, but there'll be some element of gray usually that can be useful if it's incorporated to mute the color of the reflection a little bit. So that's what you're seeing here. I'm going through and I'm tinting the water a little bit with a mixture of ultramarine blue, white, and Payne's gray, just to ensure that we do capture some of that blue reflection in the water. In this particular scene, the ocean has kind of a grayish blue quality to it. In those areas where you don't have an intense reflection directly from the sun, which is the main light source, which is typically the main light source in all landscape paintings, right? But in this case, you'll see there'll be a significant contrast developed between the reflection of the sky, which is kind of this subtle bluish gray, and the reflection of the sun, as it creates that streak that you normally see when the sun's visible over a large body of water. Further in the distance, the water will tend to appear a little bit lighter and even less saturated. So we're laying in a slightly lighter tone of that bluish gray that we're using. And we're going to start incorporating that in between some of the darker streaks running horizontally across the canvas as a way of using broken strokes to create an indication of ripples on the water surface on those horizontal planes in between those waves that are coming in on shore. And now if you let your imagination run wild, you can kind of get an indication of where we're going here with this painting. You can kind of see the composition of the painting, and it'll become more and more clear really quickly here as we move forward. Today I'm painting on a small 8x10 stretch canvas. Nothing fancy, nothing too expensive. I think it might be a craft store canvas. And just looking to get the work in. I've been doing a painting a day for about a week. Normally I'm good for 2 paintings a week, but I was able to, mainly due to the weather this week, I was able to get some more work in, which I'm grateful for. So right now what I'm trying to do is reshape and mold the horizon line. I noticed it initially was laid in at a little bit of an angle, which is not really natural to how we see the horizon. And as I refine that and hopefully get it closer to fully horizontal, I'm also trying to ensure that the line appears to be straight instead of having some unnatural ripples go across. Not intending to paint a tsunami here. So we'll continue to work at that, but it looks like I did make some improvement there. I'm going back to my palette and I'll lay in some more blues. I'm going to cover up some of the yellow ochre that's peeking through and make sure that there's some nice broken strokes throughout these horizontal planes and give that nice indication of ripples in the water. And I use varied strokes. Some are purely horizontal strokes. Some I kind of create a wave with the stroke and go back and forth with a little curl up at the end of the stroke. You'll see me rotate the brush a little bit here as well and use the very corner of the brush. I'll use the blade of the brush as well when I want to create a thinner line or a thinner stroke, usually farther off into the distance. And I'll use the flat end of the brush up close here when I want to create a wider stroke and apply the paint in a way that's indicative of a ripple in the water that's a little bit closer. Going through, getting some blue worked up into those shadow areas. We want those to overlap. We want that to be blended. We don't want it to look too meticulously careful. So trying to create a very loose painterly effect whenever possible. And we'll use some of these strokes also as an opportunity to refine some of those shadows as well and reshape them. In any way that will elevate the painting and the illusion of detail and three-dimensionality and so on and so forth in this painting. We'll go ahead and speed up the film here just because it's going to be a lot of repetitive motion, basically going back and forth throughout those sections in between the large wave masses and working to break up the color with broken strokes to further enhance the illusion of living, breathing, moving water and the ripples that would normally appear. I'll continue to work my way through back and forth and up and down in an attempt to enhance this this scene here and the way that we're just using some oil paints to create the illusion of detail in the surf. Now I'm going to go up into my palette, and it's a little off screen here, but I'm going to start building up a mixture of cadmium red dark and cadmium red light along with some cad yellow I'm going to start creating a little spectrum of reds and oranges. I'll go through and I'll selectively apply these initially to the sky, and then use the same pigments, same puddles of paint to create some interesting reflections on the water as well. And right now, largely just outlining the big shape that's making up the sun peeking through the sky. And it's not quite where I want it to be, and I'm not too worried at this point. There's going to be a lot of blending and refining done. Just getting the paint on canvas. It is thinner paint still at this point. As we progress through this painting, the paint we apply to the canvas will get thicker and thicker as we go. But at this point, I'm trying to still keep the paint rather thin. It's always easier to apply thicker paint over thinner paint. And it's always a good idea to resist the urge to start applying thicker paint earlier in a painting. And at this point, we still are pretty early in the development of this painting. So most, if not all, the paint that I apply is probably going to be somewhere in the order of a 50-50 mixture of pigment versus linseed oil to 75-25 pigment to linseed oil. So all still rather thin. I really am liking right now how the sun is developing and how that area really is providing the nice illusion of an intense ray of light coming through the clouds. I'm going to knock that down a little bit, mainly just so the paint doesn't arbitrarily get mixed on canvas. I'm going to knock down some of that red and wipe it up. So that intensity is going to go away here for a short period of time, or at least be dampened a little bit, but we'll build it back up again. Take this opportunity to incorporate a little bit more of a dark lavender color, dark purple, toward the horizon line. And this particular scene, I guess the thickness of the mist and the haze along the horizon creates a little bit of a sharper contrast right at the horizon from the ocean to the sky. The colors really do significantly transition from a blue to this kind of purpley lavender color. So we're going to work that in and use it as an opportunity to refine that horizon line a little bit more as well. A little bit more work here with the paper towel. Just picking up some of that wetter paint. This is almost like an alla prima glaze. There really is, not such a thing, I think, by most purists' opinions. I think most glazes are applied when a painting is dry, and then wiped off. In this case, I'm just using, thin paint, alla prima, one sitting, wet on wet. Just using it to create the illusion of some soft clouds and haze and sunlight dancing through. I'm going to take a quick minute or two to read an excerpt from Edgar Payne's seminal book on painting called Composition of Outdoor Painting. Toward the beginning of the painting, Payne reflects upon the importance of thought going into the creation of art and the use of one's mind. And he also speaks about many things very eloquently, but he speaks to the fact that a diversified knowledge set is important. And in this section, actually labeled Direct and Remote Influences, he goes to say, the profession of the artist is a profound one. It demands a wide knowledge not only for its own essential factors, but a familiarity with philosophy and other doctrines pertaining to the needs and desires of mankind. The theory of art is irrevocably linked with nearly all other lines of creative and factual thinking. He quotes Burke, and Burke says, art can never give rules that made art. It has been said that the better way to study art is indirectly through the study of science, history, philosophy, and so forth. These all have a distinct influence on it, but outside of this, even apparently irrelevant items may aid in some way, intending to say in the creation of art. And then further on, he says, although art is mainly concerned with appearances, impulses, and imaginative concepts, a respect for both truth and fact is always needed. Appearances are always dependent upon material substance, and art is always dependent upon thought and doctrines of other fields. I guess in simpler terms, and much less poetic, it's always good to be a little bit more well-rounded than not. I see this in sports and in business and every other aspect of life. I imagine you do too. It's always helpful to have a broad range of subjects and knowledge and experiences to tap into to help inform whatever it is that you endeavor to accomplish. The same goes for these paintings. So, maybe to bring it home to that topic of painting, if one has a sense for color theory, and then also perhaps maybe if you're painting, let's say, cowboys, or you're painting farm scenes, or you're painting seascapes like this, if you have some knowledge of surfing or farming or livestock, or how cattle are actually herded and tended to by the cowboys in the field, it'll definitely have a positive impact on your ability to render meaningful painting, one that hits home and can attract the eyes of the viewers that you hope enjoy viewing the painting that you create. So I would say in this case, like I mentioned earlier, as a child I spent a lot of time fishing and body surfing, and spent quite amount of time on the beach at the Jersey Shore. So I'm familiar with how the water looks, how the surf washes up on the sandy beaches. Most of the beaches at the Jersey Shore, unless there's been some significant erosion in areas, will have this shallow, very slightly angled beach made of soft sand, and oftentimes there'll be a sandbar off in the distance, and there'll be a deeper pool of water in between those two shallow areas. So there might be two break points, and that's kind of what we see in this painting here. We also know that the sun tends to come up, especially late in the summer and throughout the fall and winter months. It almost seems to come up, I guess what would be northeast, on the northeast kind of portion of the horizon. So, that definitely has informed this painting, with the sun being off over to the left, positioned to the left side of the horizon, and also somewhat of a distance between the second to last and the last wave shadow that you see at this point. And I just always think it's interesting, reading the thoughts of folks like Edgar Payne. He was a great teacher, a great painter, had a lot to share, and did so with great eloquence. And I just find it very helpful to read and reread his writings. And now, getting to the point in the painting where I'm going to start taking a little bit more time in between paint applications, because as you get to the later stages of a painting, it becomes more critical to do so. Actually, at this point, at the very beginning and toward the end, what I find is that I have much more success if I spend more time thinking than doing. In the middle, where we have a lot of repetitive strokes and we need to cover a lot of canvas, there's really no harm in rushing through and being thoughtless and even a little messy with your strokes. But at this point, even though I'm moving a little fast right now with my strokes, trying to scrub in some paint, At this point, in between paint applications, it's real important to take a step back and look at the painting and assess, what it is that you can do to elevate the painting before you actually take action. It also takes some time just to read off some obscure Jersey Shore history and facts that I found on a blog. I believe it's called Jersey Shore Local and Jersey Shore in Motion. Apparently, this will be a interesting fact for those that are fans of Pirates of the Caribbean, perhaps maybe. But it turns out the Jersey Shore, from the Raritan Bay to Cape May, saw the likes of famous pirates, including Blackbeard. I guess his real name was Edward Teach, and Captain Kidd. Goes on to say on this blog that maybe all those pirates swashbuckling the shore inspired Robert Louis Stevenson when he visited Osborne Island in the Manasquan River to write the treasured novel Treasure Island. And they also go on to say that there's still, I guess, folks who believe that there's treasure buried at Higbee's Beach and Cape May and Delhaven. Also, the Sandy Hook Lighthouse, my family and I just visited that recently, was known by many for guiding vessels to safe harbor. What may not be known is that it is the oldest operating lighthouse in the United States, established in 1764, and it went dark during the Revolutionary War. Colonists removed the light to keep the British in the dark as they voyaged through the New York harbor. The lighthouse was also the target of redcoat cannonball fire. However, the thick walls of the lighthouse remained unharmed somehow. Let's see, there's some interesting stuff. Lots of history at the Jersey Shore. Lots of fun in some of those towns as well. And like the last fact mentioned, most of the actual attractive kind of beaches do exist between that Sandy Hook location down south through Cape May. And there's quite a bit of public beaches too. So let's see. I guess in 1991, a German submarine, U-869 of Nazi Germany, Kriegsmarine, was discovered off the coastline of New Jersey. The divers' 6-year exploration was later chronicled in the documentary called Hitler's Lost Sub on Nova. I'm going to have to check that out. During Hitler's Operation Polkenschlag, or Operation Drumbeat, in 1941, Nazi U-boats were swarming the Atlantic Ocean, attacking Allied warships, tankers, tenders, and supply ships, sinking a total of 2,775 Allied vessels. Some Jersey Shore beachgoers have even had surreal experiences witnessing visions of Allied convoys being attacked by the U-boats or being awoke from their beds from the sounds of explosions at sea. I can't imagine what that must have been like. There are many theories as to how this particular U-boat was sunk, but the honor was given to 2 destroyers, negating the circle-running torpedo theory. Very interesting. Here's another interesting run. They entitle this little snippet, "The Rum Runners." And they go on to say, it's no surprise that the Jersey Shore was not happy about the terms of prohibition here in the United States from 1920 to 1933. And it's also no surprise that the largest rum row was off the New Jersey coast, where as many as 60-plus ships would be seen at any one time, originally 3 miles off the coast until Congress changed it to 12 miles in 1924. Local fishermen would travel out to Rum Row, purchase the goods, and then bring them back to shore in small, quick boats that could easily outrun Coast Guard ships and dock in any small river. Quite interesting. Not surprised at all. Interesting. So there's quite a few more. The original Ron John Surf Shop, which I believe now is a national chain. I think I've seen them in Florida and at a couple of other beach locations, at least on the East Coast. Some may not associate surfing with New Jersey, I guess because the waves are quite small. But ask any surfer and they'll tell you that there are plenty of waves along the coast. As long as you're willing to put on the wetsuit in the winter, founded in 1959 by Ron DeMena rather, who shaped surfboards as a pastime in 1961. He was able to open up the original Ron John Surf Shop in Long Beach Island in 1961, selling surfboards out of his tiny shop. Much different than the structure they're standing today, which is actually quite large. Quite large. Most of those stores are actually. So I might look for a few more little facts here about the Jersey Shore, but in the meantime, I wanted to note that I did use a little mixture of cad yellow along with some titanium white here, and I'm going to sprinkle it through. This is interesting. I think I might subtract some of that, particularly as you get further away from the horizon, and I might break up some of it to closer to the horizon as well. But for the most part, I think it does a fairly decent job of indicating the reflected light coming directly from the sun off of the water. And we're getting close to done. I'm liking the way this has worked out. I simplified wherever I could, and I appreciate you watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe, stay well. Give me a like if you can, and maybe share with a friend. Be well.